Okay, today I'm going to try and finish up Addy's jacket. Last night I wasn't happy with the sleeves. I thought they were just too long. So what I ended up doing is I went in and I cut off a half of an inch. So I added an inch originally to the sleeves and I didn't like it. It was just too long. So I went back in, took my seam apart, and I cut off another ½ inch off of the sleeve, and I think it fits a lot better. So once I got that sleeve cut, I put my fur back on, and I haven't done it on the one side. I've only done it on this side. I whip stitched. I went in on the sleeve and I turned. Well, I'm going to show you what I did. I turned the fur inside out, and then I just whip stitched it to that seam on the inside. And once you whip stitch that fur closed on top, the reason I don't sew it on the sewing machine is I didn't want that line of sewing to show in the front. So once you whip stitch that, you can brush the fur out and you will get a really nice fluff. See the difference how flat this fur is just laying down, because I haven't whip stitched it yet. I haven't sewn it. It's just folded up on the inside. You see that? It hasn't been whip stitched to the inside yet. Okay, so I was going through all my buttons last night trying to figure out what buttons to use, and I had a really nice gray pair that would match perfect, but I only had 2 of them and I needed 3. So that's where we're at. So today we're going to put the fur on the bottom, finish up the sleeve, and add our buttonholes. Okay, so what I did is I turned the jacket inside out. This is the one I've already turned in, and I've whip stitched it. This is the one I haven't done yet. So the reason we pushed our seams to the front is because we're going to turn this up, and we're going to cover that with the fur. So what you want to do is just get a few pins and pin that fur into place by covering up that whole seam so you see nothing there. Okay, so just take your pins, pin it down, push it towards the sleeve, push it towards the down the hand, and pin. This is the same thing we're going to be doing with the fur on the bottom of the coat also. We're going to sew it on, we're going to turn it, flip it, and then we're going to stitch it and put stitch it to the sewing line. Okay, so basically that's it. I'm not going to do the whip stitching on the video. Basically I'll just start it and show you how I do it. So just take a regular needle and thread. Needle threaded right now. Okay, well anyway, take your regular needle and thread and then just whip stitch it around the sleeve to that so that you don't see any of that seam. And you're going to like go in here, catch the seam, and pull it, and make your stitches small because you don't want your doll's fingers to get caught in any of these stitches and pull your stitches out. So make them kind of tiny when you're sewing those together like that. Okay, so I'll be back. Okay, I'm going to give you a close-up on this. Okay, here's my sleeve. I've turned my fur inside towards my sewing line. Here's my sewing line. Let me take this pin out. Here's my sewing line. I folded my fur onto my sew line, and now I'm taking little stitches trying to secure that fur to the inside seam of the cuff. But don't take very big stitches because you want You don't want your doll's fingers to get caught in those openings, if there's any openings. So tiny little stitches. And make sure you catch at least a little bit of the fur. So just like that. Pull tight. And when you pull tight, that's going to make the fur in the front flare out and give you a nice smooth finish. Okay, so I'm going to finish this and then we'll brush it out. Okay, so we finished up our hand sewing on the sleeves. It's all been sewed. You can barely see where that seam is from the front because I covered it up with the fur. So now I'm going to put it right side out. Okay, so there's one sleeve. Okay, and then the other. Okay. Alright, so now that I've got that done, I'm going to take a brush and I'm going to brush it out. And that will give you a nice fluffy look on the sleeves. Okay, so there's one sleeve and there is the other sleeve. So we've got pretty much the jacket done. Those are the collars that I was telling you about. I don't know if you can see the dark one or not. Let's see. Yeah, you can. Okay, so because the light's better in the daylight, you can see where I stitched on the collar itself around this one. And on this one, I stitched onto the back of the coat. And I think that looks a little bit better. But this is your collar. So it's at this point where you can choose whether you want to add fur to your collar or just leave it the way it is. It's up to you. But that adding fur to the collar is another choice too on these jackets. But we'll see when we get there whether we want fur on the collar too. Probably not, because we're going to have fur on the hat and fur on the boots and fur around the bottom, so you know there's such thing as overkill. Okay, so the next step for me is I'm going to turn this down and I'm going to sew a seam here. I'm just going to go straight down, turn it down, and just sew a seam. Same thing on the other side, and then we will get our buttonhole maker out and put our buttons in, and that's the next step. Okay. Okay, this next part of the video is for people who have never done buttonholes before. This is the front of my sewing machine, and here is my choice of stitches. If you see 29 through 33 are all buttonhole stitches, so those are my choices. I can make any one of those buttonholes by putting that number onto my buttonhole. So I move that to 30. So now I'm able to make number 30's buttonhole. So see that? Number 30 is my buttonhole. Okay, another thing you need to use is your buttonhole maker. It's going to look like this. And up here you're going to see some lines. There's a green line and there's 3 red lines. That is your placement of where you're going to start making your buttonhole. So we're going to line that up. It's like crosshairs. So that's where we're going to put our mark where we want our first buttonhole to be, in that spot right there. Okay, I'm holding this with another my other hand. See, this moves up and down. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to take our button that we're going to use and we're going to insert that into that slot. I don't know if I can do this with one hand. We'll see. It's not big enough. So I'm going to use these buttons, same as I did on the other jacket, and I'm going to close it up. See how I close that up? Okay, so automatically that's going to tell my sewing machine that I need a buttonhole to fit that button. Okay, so now we're going to go to our sewing machine and we're going to remove this piece. Okay, and we're going to put our buttonhole maker on the sewing machine. Let me see if I can do this with one hand. Okay, so line that up with your, sorry about this. Line that up, let it sit, and get it in the right spot. Okay, this is not going to turn out. Okay, it's on. Okay, see that? Alright, very good. Okay, so let me get a piece of scrap fabric and we'll try making a buttonhole. Okay, so what I've done is I've just taken a piece of scrap fabric and put a pin in it. And we're going to pretend that this is the buttonhole I want, and I want my buttonhole to come from here down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to put that fabric and line it up. Oh, I can't do this with one hand. Let me see if I can. Yeah, no. Let me set the camera down. Hold on. Okay, so I'm going to lift this up. I'm going to take my fabric, and do you see where I have that pin mark? I'm going to put that pin right in those crosshairs. It's going to be easier when you're dealing with a full piece of fabric. It's just that I'm using a little remnant here. So I'm going to line that button up with the side here. Okay, put your fabric down. Let's see if I can lift the camera so you can see. Okay, see where I've got that pin? And see where the little crosshairs are in there? I'm going to line that up with that pin in those crosshairs, because that's where my mark is going to be. If you don't want to use a pin, that's fine. You can use a little chalk mark. It'll do the same thing. Okay, so that's lined up. So now we want to remove our pin. And we've got our fabric lined up against the edge of the buttonhole maker. And all we're going to do is bring this little bar down here on the side. You see this little bar? This is your buttonhole bar. You're going to pull this down and you're going to insert it between the two plastic, these two plastic. And what that does, that will stop your machine and it'll tell it to go back the other way once you get to a certain point. So pull that down. Make sure that this, make sure your drop foot is down, and then all you got to do is say go. Press the accelerator. Okay, most machines will automatically stop when it's done making that buttonhole. Some machines won't. So once your machine starts going up and down in the same position, your buttonhole is pretty much done. Okay, so let's go ahead and remove that. Okay, I'm going to shut the camera down for a second. Hold on. Okay, so I pulled my buttonhole out of the machine. and I'm going to, this is going to be the actual jacket, but we've tested it to see if it's okay, and it looks good. So let's cut our strings. Okay, so we've got our buttonhole ready to go. You have a couple options. If you don't have a, you can take an X-Acto knife and cut this open. If you don't have a seam ripper, or if you have a seam ripper, the best thing to do is just take a seam ripper, put it in, I hope I'm not, and then bring it out the other side, and then just pull it, and you've already made your first cut. And then I like to take my little nippers and open it up all the way. Be careful not to cut any of your threads. Okay, so you got your first buttonhole made, and the machine did all the work for you. All you have to do is cut it open. Okay. If you want to, you can trim some of this fleece so it looks nice. But just make sure you don't cut any. So leave the same button in, because we're going to be using the same button over and over again. So I'm going to put 3 of these in, and it fits perfect. Okay, so that's our next step. Alright, I'll be back.